We visited Madeleine L'Engle in her Manhattan apartment. At 79, she has written over 50 works of fiction and nonfiction for all ages.
Well, I had my first book published shortly after college, and it was very successful. And I had chosen that this was what I was going to do long ago anyhow. But I went through some long, barren times.
For many of us, A Wrinkle in Time is our first exposure to genuine science fiction.
And when I wrote Wrinkle, it was a very different book. It didn't fit any known cubbyholes. Now there are a lot of books like it. I didn't know there was a science fiction market.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought I'd stay with my mainline publishers. I didn't know you're not supposed to have a female protagonist in a space story. I'm female, why wouldn't I have a female protagonist? I didn't know you weren't supposed to mention evil in a book that was going to be marketed for kids. I mean, I had a couple of offers of publication. I'd take out the evil. A lot of people think it's my only book. It's one of nearly 50.
As it turns out, were you one of the first that wrote for kids without talking down to them?
Yeah. I mean,
Thank you!
I started out writing for grown-ups, and I saw no reason to write any differently for kids. You do the best writing you can.
I think it inspired thousands of young women to be in charge of their lives, to get involved in science. It demystified a lot of things, which was really...
And to think you can do something, that you had to be brave to do it and take risks.
Yeah.
And when Med went back to Kansas, that was a big risk. Now, I'm not an academic, I'm a performer. And performers are not safe. That's when the good stuff comes. The questions are important.
Oh.
And a lot of the good questions don't have answers, certainly not now. And we've chosen in the West to limit ourselves to the rational and the reasonable. And anything good I write comes out from underneath, in the dark places. It comes up into the light, and I write about it.
So what risks are you taking this week?
Well, it's kind of interesting to be writing a book about Meg in her 40s, and we were asking yesterday, is there such a thing as pure evil? Are there some people who are purely evil?
It was time to go to the real office. For over 30 years, Madeleine L'Engle has worked in the Cathedral Library of St. John the Divine. Currently, what aspects of science are you most interested in?
I'm interested in the fact that nothing happens independently, that everything in the universe is interdependent. Everything affects all of the galaxies, the whole thing. And then the other thing that scientists have discovered, which I love, is you cannot study anything objectively, because to look at something is to change it and be changed by it.
These are letters from children, aren't they?
Yeah.
What is the most frequent comment you get from children?
Where do you get your ideas? And the answer is always a story about Johann Sebastian Bach. When he was an old man, one of his students said, "Papa, Bach, where do you get your ideas for all of the melodies?" And the old man said, "Why? When I get up in the morning, it's all I can do not to trip over them."
What was it about A Wrinkle in Time? Why did you trip over this one first?
We were living in the country. I had 3 young children. I was asking all the big cosmic questions that you tend to ask when you're teens and forget about later. Well, I wasn't forgetting them. And I wasn't finding the answers in the logical places like church. And I blended into Einstein, who said that anyone who's not lost in rapturous awe at the power and glory of the mind behind the universe is as good as a burnt-out candle. I thought, I have found my theologian. And I began to read Einstein and Planck and the quantum theory, and I discovered the world of particle physics and quantum mechanics. To me, this is theology. This is dealing with the nature of being.
Where do those words come from? Like tesseract and kything. How do you come up with these words?
Well, tesseract's a real word. I mean, it's a real scientific word. Kything I made up because I didn't want to use a word like ESP because it already had so many connotations. So I went to an old Scottish dictionary of my grandfather's and just looked through until I came to kything, and that seemed right. Echthros, the word for the enemy. I also wanted a word that did not have connotations. And it is simply a Greek word that means the enemy. It's an enemy-sounding word. I loved unicorns long before they became popular. And once I get something, it all becomes popular and no longer unique. But surely these creatures were all around once upon a time. We are a hostile environment for them. The science is actually pretty accurate that underlies the story.
The true science fiction fan doesn't want pulp or comic scenario. They demand that the science be accurate.
I mean, for a wind in the door, I had to go buy 2 cellular biology texts and teach myself cellular biology because I was going into a mitochondrion. No, I knew nothing about cellular biology before I wrote that book.
It was interesting to me that A Wrinkle in Time was all external kinds of things, and then the very next book went internal.
Yeah.
You know, from the macrocosm to the microcosm.
Well, I also realized that in Wrinkle, Meg succeeded by loving the lovable. She could love Charles Wallace. Now that she's got to learn to love the unlovable, and I picked Mr. Jenkins.
Do a lot of the titles come after the books have been written?
Matter of fact, I didn't name Wrinkle, my mother did. I was calling it Mrs. What's-It, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Which. But the publishers who finally took it didn't like that. They were calling it The Worlds of Charles Wallace, and I didn't like that. And my mother was visiting us, and I took her in her early morning coffee, and she said, well, I didn't sleep well last night, but I think I have a title for you right out of your own text, A Wrinkle in Time. I said, that's it? You got it? Called the publisher, said, my mother has a title for us. I said, that's it, she's got it.
What do you do for fun?
Have people in for dinner and talk. Go out in the car and show friends my favorite places. Occasionally go to the movies. When I teach a writer's workshop, one of the things that they hear over and over again is, when you write, don't think, write. Because if you think while you're writing, you're in control. You don't hear the book. Basically, it's an act of listening. But the main thing is don't think. You've done your thinking beforehand, you've done your research beforehand, or in between, but when you're actually writing, you don't think. I was going out for dinner with friends last night, and I was writing a scene just before I left. I scared myself. Or it scared me. I'm so deep into the book I'm working on now.
Is this the current story that's demanding to be written?
Yes. Meg in her 40s, the children leaving the nest, and she's saying, who am I? What am I going to do with my life the next 20 or so years?
And she gets into science, like her husband Calvin,
Yes.
right?
Calvin does regeneration. And what Meg sees is regenerating cancer so that it becomes normal tissue rather than trying to kill it.
Where did that idea come from?
A friend sent me a small article from a Midwest newspaper suggesting that, and I thought, yeah, that's right. There's a lot of interest and a certain amount of fear about DNA. I don't want to be controlled by my DNA any more than I wanted the Calvinistic predestination. I want a little bit of free will around here. She looked over at Mrs. Which. Mrs. Which was there, and then she wasn't. There was a gust of wind and a great thrust and a sharp shattering as she was shoved through what? Then darkness, silence, nothingness. If Calvin was still holding her hand, she couldn't feel it. But this time she was prepared for the sudden and complete dissolution of her body. When she felt the tingling coming back to her fingertips, she knew that this journey was almost over, and she could feel again the pressure of Calvin's hand about hers.
It will be a year or so before the next story is ready for us. Someday we may be able to test her to the future and avoid the wait. For now, this is Mary Scott for Infinite Possibilities.